Hi, this video is looking at After a Killing, which is the first poem in a triptych of poems that can be found in Seamus Heaney's Fieldwork. And again, this is a political poem, a very sad poem, as it reflects on the present state of Ireland. This particular poem was written after the murder in Dublin of Christopher Ewart Biggs, which was on the 21st of July in 1976, and he was a British ambassador who was killed by the Provisional IRA. There is a great sadness that is evoked in this particular poem, and the speaker of the poem makes reference to the men and shows a difference between the original founding members of the IRA who wanted a free Ireland, and makes a comparison between these young violent men who were responsible for this man's death in Ireland, in Dublin. And it talks about as if our memory hatched them, as if the unquiet founders. And I think the use of that phrase, as if, shows you that they're not the same, they're different. And a great deal of shame was associated with this particular man's death. It wasn't something that people were proud of. There was deep regret and deep sadness associated with his death. And this idea of sadness and regret and shame is perhaps highlighted in the phrase profane and bracing as their instruments. The use of that simile to describe their instruments, their rifles. And, the fact that they're using the word profane and bracing, Heaney is, writing that this isn't a sacred act or a religious act or a secular act. It's violent and wrong. And yet perhaps for the younger generation, these young men, as representatives of the IRA, would be looked up to by the younger generations. There's almost this boyish awe, placing them, and the way that's done is through placing the men in the first stanza, two young men with rifles on the hill, as if they're something to aspire to. And yet Heaney is saying that they're not, and condemning their acts. Stanza 2 begins with the phrase, "Who's sorry for our trouble?" and the question is asked. And that's a colloquialism that would normally be asked of somebody who's lost someone. I'm sorry for your trouble. But our trouble changes that question, and that use of the collective noun means that, it's linked to the people of Ireland. And our trouble as well also links the British, the English. So who's sorry for our trouble? Well, the people of Ireland are sorry, but also now the people of England who now share the suffering. The use of this word dwell, I think, can also have two meanings as well. So dwell among ourselves, who dreamt that we might dwell among ourselves, live together amongst ourselves. But dwell, also to think of things, to hang on things, and there's a sense of anxiety and dissatisfaction that's associated with the situation in Ireland. So it's almost as if the speaker of the poem is quite pessimistic actually about the future, and doubtful whether anything can come, any goodness can come of the relationship between the Catholics and the Protestants and the British and the Irish people. And perhaps that's reflected as well in these the basalt, the blood, water, headstones and leeches, this negative imagery, which is used to describe the way in which these people will dwell together. Yet in stanza 3, perhaps there is some hope, whereas in stanza 2 there seemed to be no hope at all. In the third stanza, in that neuter original loneliness from Brandon to Dunseverick, I think of small-eyed survivor flowers, the pined-for, unmolested orchid, as if what the people are pining for is a time when the Republic of Ireland and the north of Ireland, so from Brandon in Kerry to Dunseverick in the north, would be united. And we have this idea suggested in, I think, of small-eyed survivor flowers. And we have this image then of the orchid And the orchid can be seen to be as a rarity, but also as an emblem for integrity. In the fourth stanza, we have the reference to the house on the pier, an elbow room, and both of those images, I suppose, relate to space, desirable property, and it talks about the broad window light, and that could be perhaps seem to be linked to enlightenment and time. And we have this very short phrase here with the heart lifts. You walk 20 yards to the boats and buy mackerel. And the buying of the mackerel, again, is linked to this idea of fertility and change, and time. And that's certainly then made reference to in the final stanza. But also the reference, I think, as well to the fish is perhaps a link then as well to Christianity and to religion. And if we consider that the original idea of a free state of Ireland had its roots in Catholicism, I think that's a link there, you know, remembering what the struggle in Ireland was actually about, what it was actually for, rather than it turning into this violent struggle of the younger generation. And so hope is given in the form of the female, and you know, this idea of the future generations and how resolving the conflict in Ireland is in the hands of a younger generation. And we see that, as I'll talk you through in a moment now, in stanza 5. In stanza 5, it makes reference to this girl. The girl walks home to us carrying a basket full of new potatoes. And it's almost like this girl is like the Irish Ceres, the Roman goddess of agriculture, grain, and the love a mother bears for her child. And if we consider Ireland to be this child and the caring girl, and it's interesting what she carries in her basket. So if we think of the basket itself as being the basket of Ireland, and then it's full of new potatoes, the tight green cabbages and the carrots with the tops and the mould still fresh on them. So we still have that layer to move through with the mould, but I think this final stanza links to hope. So even though, so let me just talk you through that for a moment. So we've got the green cabbages and the carrots and the white of the potatoes, and if you consider the Irish flag with the green, the white and the orange, the green is representative of the native Irish people, predominantly Catholics, the orange to be representative of those Protestant members of the Irish community, the Irish people, from William of Orange in the 17th century, and the white in the centre of that flag as seen to be peace and harmonising that. Well, then this particular girl at the end of the poem is seen as bringing together these people. And perhaps one of the ideas that Heaney wishes to explore in this particular poem is that in order to overcome conflict, we need to outgrow it. There were physical repercussions will accompany humanity's social, moral and spiritual decline. So even though this begins with the very negative ideas associated with the tragedy of this man's death, at the end there is some hope. And as we move into the next poem in this collection, Sybil, you'll see that idea extended further in the next part of the triptych.